At 3 a.m., the president of the Willow Creek Homeowners Association stood ankle-deep in muddy water, screaming into her phone while her silver BMW gently floated into a neighbor's vegetable garden. Sirens wailed in the distance. Sprinkler systems shorted out with violent sparks. Fruit trees cracked and splintered in the raging current. And all I could think was, I warned them. But they had to dig that trench. They had to destroy my orchard. So I gave them exactly what they asked for, and just a little more. You're probably wondering how we got here. Well, let me take you back a few months when everything was still green and peaceful. Literally, my backyard was my sanctuary, my slice of peace and quiet. I lived just beyond the reach of the Willow Creek Homeowners Association on a modest patch of unincorporated land that technically didn't fall under their overbearing jurisdiction. I'd built my house with my own two hands and a shoestring budget, and though it wasn't fancy, it was home. More importantly, the property backed up to their pristine, cookie-cutter suburbia, but on my side of the fence, it was wild and free. And on that land, I had an orchard, pears, plums, figs, and a scrappy little apple tree that never quite thrived but never gave up either. That orchard wasn't just a hobby. It was my legacy, my therapy, a place to lose myself when the world became too loud. But apparently, to some, it was an eyesore. Enter Stephanie Wren, president of the HOA. Yes, that was her real name. I know, it sounds made up, like something out of a satire. But there she was, clipboard and all. Stephanie had the kind of permanent squint that made you think she was always judging you, whether it was your landscaping or your life choices. She never officially introduced herself. She didn't need to. I knew she was the second I found the first HOA newsletter stuffed illegally into my mailbox. Most of the time, we ignored each other. I stayed on my side, she stayed on hers. Until the puddle. It was February. A long, rainy stretch turned the far end of their subdivision into a shallow lake. Any reasonable person could see it was due to poor grading and a complete failure in their drainage system. But instead of addressing their own mistakes, Stephanie and her equally obnoxious sidekick, Brad from Lot 14, decided to blame me. Or rather, my orchard. According to them, my modest irrigation system was responsible for increased groundwater retention, which they claimed caused flooding in a neighbor's backyard. I found out about their theory in the most HOA way possible, a passive-aggressive email blast to the neighborhood Google group. My address, bolded in all caps, contributing non-compliant water flow source. At first, I laughed. Then came the trench. One morning, I stepped outside with my coffee and found a backhoe straddling the property line. Men in reflective vests dug a trench along the border, carving deep into the earth. The line of destruction ran straight into my orchard, slicing through roots like they were spaghetti noodles. Two of my plum trees were nearly cut in half. A fig tree tilted at a pathetic angle, its roots ripped and exposed. 5 years of careful cultivation, ruined. I stormed over to Stephanie's place, camera rolling on my phone. She answered the door with her signature smugness, a glass of wine already in hand. Why did your people trespass and destroy my orchard? I asked, struggling to keep my voice even. It's necessary maintenance, she replied smoothly. For the good of the community. And when exactly did I give you permission to trench through my property? I pressed. Oh, don't be dramatic, she said with a dismissive wave. It's just landscaping. I stood there in shock. You kill my trees for landscaping. They're just trees, she said, sipping her Chardonnay. That was when I knew two things. Stephanie Wren had no soul. And this was going to get ugly. I went through all the right channels. Took photos. Documented everything. Contacted my insurance. Hired a lawyer. He was polite, competent, and ultimately useless. Technically, the trench was on their side of the boundary, barely. Suing them would cost me more than I could hope to recover. The HOA had a legal team on retainer, of course. They were pros at this kind of war. And they weren't done. They started sending me notices, accusing me of deliberately redirecting water toward their neighborhood. My humble irrigation setup, just a hose and gravity, was now being labeled a malicious water management system. They gave me 30 days to cease non-compliant activities. I laughed so hard I had to sit down. But it wasn't funny when the trench they'd cut caused real damage. With the next storm, erosion ate away more of my land. Another 5 trees showed signs of stress. One of my pear trees collapsed entirely after a particularly bad night of wind and rain. I confronted them at an HOA meeting. They called security to escort me out. That was when something in me snapped. Not the angry, wild kind of snap, but the cold, methodical kind. The kind that says, fine, you want a flood? Let's make it rain. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The final straw wasn't the trench. It wasn't the trees. It was when I came home one day to find a concrete drainage pipe cutting straight through my back fence. No warning. No permission. No explanation. They'd literally sawed through my fence, installed a pipe aimed directly into my orchard, and sealed it up like it had always been there. I stood in the dark that night with a flashlight, staring at that pipe, humming quietly like a movie villain halfway through Act 2. They thought they could funnel their problem onto my land, and I'd just accept it. They thought wrong. I spent the next week studying municipal water codes, soil permeability, liability clauses. The deeper I dug, the more I realized they'd overplayed their hand. Their trench was a violation of easement laws. Proving it in court would take years, and they knew it. But physics doesn't care about paperwork. I call my old friend Eric, a civil engineer with a dry sense of humor and a love of revenge as an art form. I explained the situation. He was quiet for a long time. You know, he finally said, if they're going to use gravity against you, there's no reason you can't return the favor. It was the most beautiful sentence I'd ever heard. Eric came out that weekend. We walked the property with a laser level and topo maps. It turned out their fancy trench only worked because my land was soaking up their overflow. If I made sure the water didn't absorb, or if it found a new path, well, Operation Reverse Flood was born. I didn't need to break laws. I didn't need to destroy anything. All I had to do was stop being their sponge. I laid out a covert French drain system, think underground water slides, redirecting the water they sent me right back to them. I replaced the topsoil along their trench with packed clay and gravel. I planted dense shrubs along the property line to subtly guide the flow. Underneath it all, I buried pipes that funneled everything back downhill into the lowest points of their subdivision. I worked quietly. Nights. Early mornings. No one suspected a thing. They thought I'd given up. They thought I was replanting. I wasn't replanting. I was reloading. The irony was delicious. All I had to do was let nature do what it always does. Water flows downhill. Always. And when the next big storm hit, it was going to flow right back to them. And it did. 3 days before the storm, Stephanie sent me a certified letter, a final warning, she called it, demanding I stop my disruptive landscaping. She underlined the last sentence. You are responsible for any damages caused by your actions. I laughed. Stephanie had no idea. The storm was biblical. Rain hammered the roofs, flooded gutters, and turned streets into rivers. I watched from my porch as the trench filled, overflowed, and then, just as Eric and I had planned, sent the water racing back into Willow Creek. By midnight, their stormwater solution was a disaster. The concrete trench became a canal, overflowing into their yards. Water pushed their back doors. Gardens drowned. Basements flooded. By 1 a.m., Stephanie was on her front porch, yelling into her phone, her hair plastered to her face, her bathrobe soaked as her BMW floated off like an expensive boat. I didn't need to gloat. The water was doing it for me. Their catch basin clogged. Water spilled over, carving new paths through their manicured lawns. Sidewalks disappeared under brown water. Mailboxes listed sideways like sinking ships. Sirens wailed. Fire trucks arrived. So did the city engineers. I stood at the edge of it all, coffee in hand, just another concerned neighbor. One of the engineers pointed to the trench and muttered, "Whose bright idea was this?" I smiled. I think it was an HOA initiative. By noon, homeowners were circling Stephanie's house like villagers around Frankenstein's castle. Angry, wet villagers. Some were waving phones. Others, legal threats. Stephanie tried to hold a meeting. Barely anyone showed. Within weeks, the entire board resigned. One by one, Stephanie held on the longest, clinging to her title until the bitter end. Her resignation letter was defensive, but it ended with the words everyone wanted, effective immediately. I resign as president of the Willow Creek Homeowners Association. I printed it, framed it, hung in my shed. They had called my orchard a nuisance, an eyesore. Funny thing about nature, it always finds balance, just like water, just like karma.